very welcome to the Reporters Roundtable, and it is a good day. You know that anti-corruption watchdog Transparency International has ranked the public sectors in sub-Saharan Africa as the most corrupt in the world. The German-based group says majority of countries in the world are making little or no progress in ending corruption. With this in mind, what can be done in other sectors where corruption is rife? Can the effects of corruption be countered with silence? How can we invite, or we all can rally around to fight this canker for development, peace and security? With me to do this is Nana Kwame Fordjour, or say Fordjour. He is a communicator and a PR practitioner. With him is Beauty Emefa Narteh, or Narteh. She is the Executive Secretary of the Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. And with him is the Project Coordinator for the local chapter of Transparency International, that is the Ghana Integrity Initiative. He is in the person of Mr. Michael Okai. Good to have you. Thank you. Let me start with the the local chapter of Transparency International, because you work for them, Ghana Integrity Initiative. Why is it that corruption is not dealt with as a matter of urgency in our part of the world?
Thank you, Rebecca, for the opportunity to contribute to the fight against corruption in Ghana. In Ghana, there have been successive attempts at solving the canker since the introduction of the criminal making corruption as a crime since 1960. So that's a major attempt, making sure that we have identified corruption as a crime. That's there have been several attempts. Introduction of Financial Management Act, introduction of the Yoko, Shraj. These are all actions put in place to minimize or to eradicate corruption. But you realize that the issue about corruption, it's not just a simple issue. It's very complex, and so if you don't use complex means of solving it, if you don't bring about everyone, you can't handle corruption just at one angle. You have to bring on board everyone, and so that has been the challenge. Ghana Integrity Initiative, you go out and the people ask you, how can you solve corruption? How can you eradicate corruption? And my response is, with you and me on board, we can do it. So you realize that the collective effort is lacking. The political will is lacking. We have politicized a lot of issues that should be treated as corrupt issues. Once you politicize it, then people will take sides. These are the major issues that we have as a country in solving corruption.
Right, let me come to the coalition against corruption. How complex is the issue with what? Say again?
Anti-corruption coalition.
Yes, anti-corruption coalition. Yeah. How complex is the situation with the picture that Mr. Okai has just painted? Or?
Many thanks, Rebecca. When it comes to fighting corruption, as Michael said, it is indeed a complex issue that requires some dedicated effort in fighting it. Over the years, we have had presidents who have made some commitments, starting with our first president under this democracy is
the Fourth Republic.
I mean, the Fourth Republic, the Flight Lieutenant General Rawlings, who came with the probity accountability. And you saw, or we witnessed, the kind of reaction or response that we had under his administration. And then we also witnessed some seemingly commitment from former President Ajekum Kufuor, who also talk about zero tolerance to corruption. And then, so what I'm just trying to draw attention to is that the fight against corruption has a leadership role to play. We all have roles to play collectively, but leadership is very important, and leadership is able to rally support. Leadership is able to elicit commitment from citizens. Currently, our current president also has made some commitment. In fact, he even won the elections on the ticket of fighting corruption, and has initiated some steps in fighting corruption. But what we lack is a holistic approach to the fight against corruption. So currently, if we tackle it as a one angle or one-off thing, then it fights back and it doesn't work. But as a country, we have adopted what we call the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan, which is a 10-year benchmark helping us to fight corruption. And interestingly, this NACAP was adopted by all the parties. In fact, it was adopted in Parliament under the administration of the government in opposition, with the support of the government in power, throwing the signal that both parties see the need to have a collective approach in fighting corruption. And the NACAP document clearly outlines 3 strategies that we should use, which is in terms of preventive measures. We also need to use what we call enforcement. Enforcement has to do with investigating and then also punishment. And then finally, awareness creation, because people need to know, people need to understand what the issues are. And that is the holistic approach we are looking for. Currently, there's some work being done that we could commend the president for, but it's not as holistic as enough. It's not as enabling as we would have had it. And previously, I just want to draw this in, that previously we used to compare ourselves with other countries, but fortunately we are having countries in the sub-region who are doing fantastic work that we can emulate from. So it is how to make corruption a high-risk venture, so that anybody who wants to be corrupt really has to be emboldened to be corrupt. That is what is lacking in Ghana.
Nana, anything to add to what has been said already?
Yes, I think they've made a lot of important points, but I'd like to say that the main problem here is ignorance on the part of the citizenry. Why am I saying this? The boundaries of corruption in itself are not well demarcated or are not really clear to a lot of people. When you ask someone about corruption, the person actually restricts corruption to politicians or restricts it to either fraud or embezzlement. But corruption actually goes beyond these 2 things. Nepotism is actually a corrupt act. Conflict of interest is a corrupt act. So if you're a government official or anyone and you're awarding a contract and there's that conflict of interest and you are sort of the final authority, you need to recuse yourself. Also, that's what is done. But in our system, that people are actually silent on it. And I will say corruption actually, it's still pervasive because of ignorance. That's what I'll say. Secondly, what I would like to say is that people have also lost confidence in the institutions that are tasked to fight corruption, right? They believe when a government official is at fault or anything, they believe when they take these people on, it won't go anywhere. At the end of the day, they feel they'll be victimized. So the fear of victimization prevents them from actually coming forward, forgetting that the Whistleblowers Act was actually passed in 2006, an act that actually protects whistleblowers. People are ignorant of these things, and that has generated that kind of apathy in actually helping the citizenry fight the canker of corruption. That's what
you talked about something on ignorance. I wanted you to explain further. Well, when you say it, the fight against corruption is as a result of the citizenry being ignorant. Ignorant in what sense? I think someone may ask.
Okay. So someone will ask, okay, what exactly is corruption? We need to give corruption a definition. And the Transparency International did that some years ago, where they said
corruption itself is the misuse of entrusted authority for personal benefits. You see that, I mean, in some institutions, something that's a vehicle that's actually allocated for official use is being used for personal purposes or personal purposes by an individual. That itself is corruption. But people feel, oh, that has been done in the past, and people don't see that very act as corruption. So that's what I'm talking about here. The definition itself, the definition of corruption itself, is a big problem to the citizen. That's what I see. That's how I see it.
Well,
you wanted to add something.
Yes. I would like to disagree if Nana puts the problem as ignorance. We have evidence to suggest that people are fully aware when it comes to corruption. People have excuses they give. Recently, we had a survey, and clearly we were able to sample or interview almost 18,000 Ghanaians, and it's one of the largest sample size that has been used. And this survey wanted to know about people's experience of corruption, knowledge of corruption, and perception of corruption. Why did we do that? All previous surveys looked at perception. And because it is perception, we don't see the actual experiences or the knowledge part of it. So even when you talked about the CPI, it's still a perception, and people argue that perceptions may not be a reality. So we thought that it's important to highlight the reality so we could reflect it against the perception and see. And interestingly, most of the people are fully aware. They know that bribery is corruption, which for me is good. If you stretch it, there were some issues that in terms of interpretation, but bribery is key when you come to the fight against corruption, and it's basic, and it affects every citizen in so many ways, especially when it comes to accessing social services. But they still had excuses for giving the bribe. So they know that what I'm giving out is a bribe and is corruption. But the excuse they gave was that, one, they want to facilitate the process of accessing social services, which also comes back to what I talked about, that the holistic approach. So it is not because the person is not able to access service, public service delivery in time. So they kind of want to lubricate that
wheels,
so that they can
fast track the process.
Exactly. So they fully are aware, but they do it. The other reason they also give is that they don't want to have problems with authority. So for instance, if a police stops somebody on the road, instead of saying, take me to court, the person is ready to part away with money. Instead of insisting on, like, take me into the court so that I'll be fined or something like that. So they would rather sort themselves out on the street than be taken. So that's why, as a coalition, we believe that if we have to address it, we need to address it holistically. And also brings about the issue of our institutions and the weaknesses that we see in the institutions. So if the institutions are not as working as they should, if they are not providing the services that they need to provide to the citizens, it also provides some vulnerabilities, and then citizens become entangled in that web. And that is why we think that it is important. Finally, I wanted to also stress on the issue of enforcement. Enforcement in terms of punishment is important. We cannot fight corruption without punishing people. So if somebody commits a crime and they get away with it, it sends that signal out there that anybody can get away with, and brings me to my earlier points that we are not making corruption a high-risk venture. So just to say that in terms of ignorance, people are not completely ignorant about the law. They know, but sometimes they justify it, which we think that it's not the best, but all those justifications should be addressed properly.
Right. Now I'll come back to you, but I said Mr. Okai wanted to interject, but
no, but just to buttress on what Emefa just said, punishment. You punish offenders to serve as a deterrent to others. Because if my friend offends and then he goes scot-free, I'll also be tempted to do the same. So that is the essence of it. Offenders should be punished, and then make like awareness around the issue. Like he mentioned, he was coming from an angle where people have not been exposed to the issue. People are aware, they know what it is, but you keep on telling them that this is the effect of what you do. Because once you accept that phenomenon, then it becomes a practice. People will no longer see it as corruption. Now it becomes compulsory. So once you're on the road, everyone has to pay. Once you want your child to go to school, you have to pay. So that it becomes a norm. And so that is the essence, that is what we do as anti-corruption civil society organization. Make sure people can resist the urge to pay illegal payments. Talk about it. Resist people who ask you for those money. And there are avenues that you can report those people to. So these are the areas that we talk about.
But before I come to that, please add. I'll come to Nana, and I'll give you a follow-up question on what you've just said.
So I think Michael made a very important point about the effects, and which we sum up as cost of corruption. I think that is what citizens are not appreciating. Citizens are not appreciating that if a politician, for instance, steals money from the state, it's going to cost you the school that you need. It's going to cost you the good road that you need. It's going to cost you the good water that you need to drink. So the direct effects of corruption is what we are not realizing. And people have the perception that this is a buying in the local parlance. It's government, it's not us. And us, because of that, we have this project that we are implementing on social accountability to let citizens actively participate in their own development so that they can demand direct accountability from their duty bearers, which is very important if we have to make steps, because politicians will not give us what we think we need. But when we demand it and they know that we are serious about our demands, they will give us what we need. So it is important that we all look at how corruption affects us personally, so that it's not just my 5 cedis bribe to the police, but holistically, how does that 5 cedi cost becomes a cost to me as a citizen? That is very important.
You raise a very good point about sorting ourselves out on the streets and all of those, and so that you wouldn't fall into any legal tussle. So, okay, let me just do away with it. But I wanted to follow up on the point you made and wanted to find out about what specific challenges are related to that in the fight against corruption.
In terms of people reporting.
Exactly. Because once you report, we know how our system works. So what are the realities on the ground?
So I'll start from this point. You know, the challenge is that once you report and you don't get any good response, even if what you reported is investigated, you have to get a feedback. They tell you that, okay, what you reported, this is the outcome. But a lot of people report, they don't follow up one, they don't even get a feedback from where they reported to. It's a major issue. So then it becomes, I'll not even report. If I report, I don't get any response. I don't get any results out of the reports that I give. So then they lose interest in reporting. So then how can we now promote people reporting, getting a feedback from where they have reported to, and then you build up that interest that once you report, you also have to follow up.
How do we do that?
Good.
That is, yeah, how should that be done?
So now with Ghana Integrity Initiative, we have what we call the Advocacy and Legal Advice Center, where you can report issues about corruption, witnesses and victims about corruption can report to. We have an officer takes your complaint and then pursues this complaint and gives you a feedback. if that complaint has to go to the police service, has to go to the ports, has to go to GRA, they do that. And then they give you a feedback, making sure that those issues are resolved. And then the complainant gets a response. I'm not saying you get a successful response, but you get a response that satisfies the complaints that you give. So that is what we are talking about. But those who will not pass through the Advocacy and Legal Advice Center, once you report an issue to the police service, you have to follow up. And the police also have a check. When you report to the police and then you feel that you are not getting good responses from them, they have a check. You can go to the PIPs. Say, this is the complaints that I made to this place, but I'm not getting any response. So there are areas that you can make complaints, seek grievance, and then you get response. But it's the follow-up that is a challenge. People will have to now build up their interest to follow up and get responses.
Anna, coming with your
I think Michael has made some important points, and it actually dovetails into some of the points I was making earlier. First of all, my point about ignorance also has to do with how you report public officials, and he mentioned PIPs and all that. When the policeman is actually engrossed in a corrupt act, does the general citizen know that they have to go to PIPs or they need to go here? When, let's say, the issue of corruption has to do with someone in the judiciary, where do you go? And that is my point, that people are ignorant on the ways of tackling corruption. Yes, and the second point was about the fear of victimization, because they fear at the end of the day they will be dealing with powerful hands. They are going against powerful hands, and these powerful hands can make things very uncomfortable or make their lives miserable. So they'll rather sit aloof and look at the corrupt act being perpetrated by these people, and we won't get anywhere at the end of the day. So basically that is my point. Now the way to go about this is actually we need to invest into advocacy campaigns on corruption, and that should actually be a government initiative. You start advocating about corruption from the basic schools, the secondary schools, the universities, and in the various communities, so that people know, okay, so the fight against corruption is not that complicated actually. There are just simple steps I can take to ensure that corruption is eradicated. That is the way to go. If we don't do this and the people are not informed, corruption will still persist, and in 10 years' time we'll sit here to talk about it. So basically that's what I'd like to add.
Right, but Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, the fight against corruptions and in schools and championing the campaign in schools, and is this something new to you?
Not necessarily, but of course I do agree with Nana that we need to do more. For instance, when we were growing up, we had this booklet called GACC for Boys and Girls that detailed some values and principles that you could adopt. But now we have this, they have social studies that gives some basic understanding of things that they should do, but we think that it is important if we can incorporate it into the curricula, because people grow, values are important, especially when you talk about integrity. Integrity is a value that when you have, regardless of where you find yourself, regardless of who is watching or not watching, you are able to discipline yourself properly because of that value, which is very key. And we think that that is a value we could promote at the school level. We are currently working, we've been working with NCC, for instance, that has that mandate to see how we can promote more of that. Ghana Integrity Initiative has set up what they call integrity clubs in the universities, but is now looking at bringing it down at the basic schools also. That process is still ongoing, but we need to do more. Yes, so values are important because things are going so fast and children are learning so fast. So if we are not able to inculcate those values in them, they grow up as adults knowing no boundaries. And you see, there's also a lot of socialization. Children watch and sometimes replay what they see adults do. So sometimes we go in the field, you ask a child what they want to do, they want to be politicians, not because they see it as like something that is a good model, but the response they give you after when you probe is because they see it as an easy way of making money. For us, that is an unfortunate situation if our children grow with those values, like going to a profession because of money and not committing themselves to why they want to see it as a way to serve the nation or as a way to provide some needed support. But if they see it only as an incentive to them directly, that would be unfortunate. So it's important we create more awareness and then get our children to understand these issues.
Right, Ms. Okai, you know that people have said that, okay, one, to tackle this scourge, then there's the urgent need for collective action on corruption networks because they are getting increasingly sophisticated. To what extent can these help to fight the canker or combat the canker of corruption? Okay,
thank you. So, Beauty started with the National Anti-Corruption Action Plan.
Yeah.
That is the blueprint for Ghana. It gives us the way to go in the fight against corruption. The only thing is the willpower. The political will, citizens getting on board, everyone getting on board in the fight against corruption. Because you have to involve the legislature, the executive, the judiciary. You have to involve the churches, the religious bodies, Muslim, all types of religious bodies. Involve, like you mentioned, the universities, the primary schools, and then the senior high schools. Everyone has to get on board. But it starts with leadership. Government providing funding from that side. Putting in place measures, what we call anti-corruption frameworks and policies that will promote prevention. So you have to, because you have to put in place prevention. And then when someone is bold enough to still do it, you prosecute, investigate and prosecute. But you also include education. Tell people, let them know the effect. Because if I know that if I sit idle and I don't do anything, my children, my family members will not have access to good drinking water, will not have access to good roads, will not have access to electricity. So then once people start to link up their development to the effect of corruption, then you say, hey, look, we have to get on board. So that is how we have to do it. So education is key. Put in place measures to prevent it also. Then rally the support of everyone. Churches, most importantly, religious bodies, I should put it that way. You know, religious bodies have influence on a lot of people in Ghana as our practices goes. So once they take a lead in this aspect, we are on the way to fighting corruption.
Right. It is the round table. We are looking at United Against Corruption for peace and stability, and of course for Ghana's development. And we are here with Mr. Okai from Ghana Integrity Initiative. This is Narteh from Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, and Nana Emefa Fordjour is a communicator and a PR practitioner. Welcome back. And this one says, Madam, what you described about corruption is far from what we citizens need the government to do. Police taking money from minor offences and releasing the offender is not corrupt. It's not about corruption. But what we see as corruption is those in government that embezzle public funds and go around free, believing they are above the law. It's all over Africa. Surprisingly, you didn't add your name, but Nana, I'll come to you to find out about how we can win the fight, or how the winning of this fight can lead to a sustainable path of growth and development or transformation. But this particular submission leads me to a question about the kind of corruptions we have. With Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition, do you deal with every type of corruption?
Yes, when it comes to corruption, we don't really limit it. Corruption is corruption. And the law has no classes of corruption. The law clearly puts everybody, on the same level. So regardless of your position, regardless of your connections, regardless of who you are, once it's corruption, that is what the law clearly says. The challenge we have is that when citizens see selective corruption, which is what I talked about as deterrent, in terms of enforcement, when we have selective enforcement, for instance, we have a politician stealing money and going scot-free, and then you have somebody stealing a goat and is jailed. That becomes selective justice, which is what we frown upon. So corruption is corruption. We should tackle it, and we should not color it. We should not give it in terms of level. And that is the best way to go. And that is how, if we embrace it as a holistic fight, then regardless of who is culpable, I think I can cite Israel, where the prime minister was jailed for corruption. And it didn't receive any fanfare. It didn't receive, even the day he was released, it didn't receive any fanfare. He just left quietly and went home. But in this country, we have colored corruption, so that, and we have termed it as witch hunting. So the moment somebody with a political color comes to the radar, it is seen as witch hunting. And that is because our institutions do not have that independence to operate. That is the challenge. For instance, if you go to some of the African countries, let's say South Africa, the former president was taken to court by the special prosecutor. Will this happen in Ghana? I don't know. But my point is, we should fight corruption holistically. We should be able to say that you have fallen short of the law because the Constitution does not recognize anybody above it. So for me, that is the way forward. And that is why we are doing a lot of advocacy, and we are supporting strengthened and independent institutions. For instance, the work that the Auditor General is doing, we are all commending it. For the first time, we've seen an audited report published, even when Parliament had not discussed it. When was the last time we saw this? So if we have all our institutions independent, working with fear, without fear of anyone, or just doing their work, I believe that will go a long way. So it is important that all our institutions who are mandated with that rule assert themselves and work as per their mandate.
Okay.
This will help us.
It is good that you said that corruption is well, because from what he sent, then it means that they see politicians who go scot-free as being those who are corrupt, and not the policeman maybe who takes the bribe, or not a citizen who works in a private sector who takes something to facilitate or oil the wheels and facilitate the process. They see it as, okay, it is only the politicians who are corrupt.
But I also
that is a line.
Correct
Yes.
this impression. Yeah. You see, we also have perceptions and we also have speculations. Sometimes information goes out there. For instance, as an organization, we believe that the due process should always be followed. But sometimes people put out speculations, they may not necessarily have substance. But because it's speculations, people talk about it, and we may not have the evidence for it. So it is important that as citizens, how far can we go to say that I have this evidence and I want to put this out there? People have done that, people have sacrificed themselves for their country because they believe that the right thing needs to be done. it is okay for us to talk about it in the comfort of
our
homes without necessarily activating some of the laws. For instance, the whistleblower law, we are one of, in West Africa, we are the only country that has this law. I've gone through some of the countries to share our experiences. But Nigeria does not have the whistleblower law. But when it comes to whistleblowing, they are doing better than us. You see, so it is also about the passion and the aggression that citizens are ready to say that, look, we are ready to fight corruption. All this will help in addressing the issues of corruption.
Okay. Mr. Okai, I come to you with a research that has been conducted and get your take on it. But Nana, in fighting this, how can it lead to a sustainable path to Ghana's transformation and development?
Thank you very much. Rebecca, I feel the fight against corruption is crucial to socio-economic development. Why am I saying this? First of all, if we're able to win this fight, there'll be superior infrastructural development. And let me use this example. Some months ago, a friend of mine had an accident in a different region. And I won't mention the name of the region, but insisted that he would be brought to a hospital in the Greater Accra region. Why is that the case? Because he didn't really have confidence in the health system in that particular region. If resources would be allocated appropriately to the various regions, that they'll have a standard, a well-developed health system in all these regions, these things would not happen. People, whenever things happen to them anywhere, they'll say, okay, we can go for treatment because we have confidence in the system in this particular region or this particular area. Secondly, when investors are coming into a country, one thing they check or they look at is your ranking on the corruption index. And I've come across a couple of investors who actually do that before they enter a particular country. When a country wins the battle against corruption, you realize that a lot of investors who come to the country, at the end of the day, citizens will be employed, a lot of them. The country, in return, also get a lot of foreign exchange. So this, in the long run, will also improve the social, economic fortunes of a country. Finally, I'll say it bridges the inequality gap. And you know, the inequality gap between the rich and the poor is quite high in Ghana. Now, we want a system where everyone wants, you are a good standing member of a country and you want quality education, you should be able to get it. Now we have free SHS in Ghana, and every second cycle institution should be able to provide quality education to its students. And I believe the fight against corruption is crucial in consolidating a system like this. That's what I'll say for now.
It's okay. Yep. Anything else to add before I come to the research and the indices that track and show that, okay, corruption has an indispensable sort of bearing on international security, and we want to find out how true that is. But let me have your take first on how it can transform Ghana and for our development, peace, stability, and all of those.
So once you are able to eradicate corruption or minimize it to the barest minimum, corruption and bribery, then you are on the path of promoting development, where resources, taxes that have been paid will be used efficiently. So you promote efficiency in the administrative process. Is it in government, in especially the decentralized system of governance at the district assembly level? You have people working for the benefit of their citizens. And then you promote people owning the country. This is my country. I know this country is there for me, so I'm ready to die for it. Because people will see that there's development, there's progress. People, once they want access to healthcare, they can get it. Because I'm paying taxes, and then once I want to go to the hospital, I have to go to a hospital where there's a medical professional there who will take good care of me. It's very essential. Now you are sick, you are maybe in, let's say, Dudi Papase, one of the local communities, and then you are sick. You need just paracetamol, and you can't get it. One, the roads are not good. There's no health facility. There's no doctor or a health professional to look after you. Why? Because people have not used the limited resources that we have contributed in a wise way. So this is something that you have to look at critically. Once we have been able to eradicate complete corruption, minimize or eradicate, take out bribery, then we are on the path to
transformation.
Yes.
Right. Research has also shown that with indices that track corruption, it has indicated that, okay, it has a bearing on international security. And with people who deal with corrupt matters and issues around corruption, how true is this?
So I will just talk about the Transparency Corruption Perception Index. It's in low-ranking countries. You can also see that these are countries that are in war, that are in conflict. And you realize that, you know, once there's war and conflict, there's abuse of rights, human rights, people will not pay, there's illicit transfer of resources, people will not respect human rights, people will not even pay their taxes, and then you have people who abuse their authority. So then so once you have this, it leads to this. But it also now promotes a situation where those who want to do terrorism can take advantage. You go so now we talk about Libya, we talk about Syria. You realize that those who are promoting terrorism live in this area because they are war-torn, there's conflict. No one can check them. So they smuggle in and then they settle in those areas, and then they can do whatever they do because there's war and then there's conflict. But then it has that impact on the citizens where corruption will thrive. You cannot have any development again. So that is the linkage. One leads to the other, but it also then now exacerbates the situation because it increases the phenomenon the more. So that's how it is.
I hear you humming and concurring to what Mr. Okai is saying. Any other thing to add?
I just want to add that one other element of that is about rigging of elections, which also becomes a big problem. So the sovereignty of a people is abused because people are able to take advantage of the loopholes in the electoral system. For instance, vote buying is clearly an offense per law, but where the system is corrupt, people take advantage and then buy votes and win elections. When you talk about laws, electoral laws also, for instance, countries that have not done well on the CPI means that not just electoral laws, but they don't have very good, robust laws. That also affects the country. For instance, Ghana, there's one law that we have been advocating and pushing for, which is the right to information. It has stayed there for 17 years, and it's not being passed. And this is a law for the people, but it's not being given. Another law that has also been a challenge is asset declaration, which is clearly a joke, because people declare assets, we are not able to verify the declared asset. So people come into public office, presumably saying they have declared their assets, they leave public office saying they have declared their assets, but between their coming and their going, we don't know it. So these are the situations that perpetuate issues of corruption and affect the perception indices.
We are talking about a very serious issue confronting, it is not just an African problem or not just a Ghanaian problem, but it is a global problem. But elsewhere, they are making all attempts to fight it and nib it in the bud. We are talking corruption. We are talking corruption because once it is not tackled, it draws us back and our development also is stifled. We'll be back and we'll give you the chance to call into the program and make your submissions, your comments, your suggestions. We are willing to take them, but just remember that this is a national platform and the language should be civil, and once you call, kindly lower the volume on your set so we can have a fruitful discourse. Thank you for staying on to the round table, and we are talking corruption and how we can unite and fight against that canker. You can call into the program on 0209-578-478, 0209-578-478, and give us your take as to how this can be tackled holistically, as my guests have suggested that it needs a holistic approach to tackle the issue of corruption, and an all hands on deck approach. This one says, my name is Abu. I am in my home watching you. I'm just weeping in my house to hear all this. In fact, what is happening in Ghana is serious when it comes to corruption, and the government, if the government don't take care about it, there's no way we can progress as a nation. Who will fix it if we do not fix it? It's a shame to hear all the issues that happens. Once one is in opposition, we talk very much, but when we come to government, we just do what the other party has done. Corruption needs to be nipped in the bud, and this is from Abu. Abu, thank you very much for that one. You can also call into the program. We are talking United Against Corruption for Peace and Stability, and we've been told that once corruption thrives, then of course there will be unrest in most countries, and there will be transfer of funds, transfer of resources to other areas, and the country will suffer. So how do we do this? Can we fight the issue of corruption by just staying silent because there is one government or another, or once you are in your own organization, you are taking monies to oil the wheels and facilitate the process? Nobody should speak about it, and we all should remain silent. That is what we are discussing. You can call into the program once again on 0209-578-478, 0209-578-478. Mr. Okai, or let me come to Nana first, because before I went on the break, I ended with you and Ms. Narteh. Let's look at what will become of our country if corruption is not combated decisively and we allow it to thrive.
Okay, thank you very much again, Rebecca. I feel if corruption is not combated and it persists, what will happen is that the inequality gap, that's the gap between the rich and the poor, will widen. And when this happens, right, we'll be in a state of anomy, or what we call lawlessness, where people will rise up to fight state institutions, where there will be frequent demonstrations and all that, and where things in the nation will actually it will actually slow down processes, development processes in the country. You realize that I'll mention this country, the name of, let's say, Nigeria and all that. You saw recently that some university students went on demonstration and they actually fought the police and military. They didn't care because they don't have confidence in the system. So that's not what we want to happen in Ghana. That's why corruption is very important. That's why these issues are very pertinent to every citizen. Because when people have lost confidence and all that, social vices even in the country will rise. And you'll be there one day in your house, excuse me to say, if someone just pull a knife, attack you at the end of the day because the person doesn't have confidence in the system. So the state of lawlessness, if corruption is not battled, will actually be on the rise in the country, in the entire country, if corruption is not combated. Also, if corruption is not combated at the end of the day, right, people will not own the country, right? They will not actually feel part of the country. They will be apathetic towards things of the country because they feel at the end of the day only a few people will benefit. And Karl Marx, a sociologist, actually...
Let me take John.
Okay.
Hello, John.
Yes.
Good to have you on the line. Where are you reaching us from?
From Nungwa.
From Nungwa, thank you so much. Please go ahead with your suggestion or contribution.
I think the corruption fight on the head to the down. And what we can do to fight corruption is to inculcate the idea about abusing corruption from the school, from the school children. You have to do something like a curriculum, school curriculum at the school level, and then teach the students about corruption, what is good and what is not good. Because sometimes maybe you are in a position and someone wants to get something from you. So he or she will come to you and then give you something to get that chance. And if you accept the thing, you are corrupt. Because based on the thing that is given to you, he will influence you in future. Now, the NCC, they have been mandated to educate people on corruption. Now, when you look at the situation, there's something like funding for them. There's nothing like funding for them to educate the people. So what the government has to do is that about the government to give them the resources. When you go to some of the assemblies, when you talk to the NCC people, they lack the facilities, they don't have vehicles, they don't have even food. We get the community to educate the children. So I think before we can find the corruption, we have to have certain mind change. We have to change our mind, the way we think this, because at every center of the government, people have this perception. They're working for my father. They're not going well. They're going well. We don't really carry if you put it at your shoulder level. So before we can have this mentality, we have to think the children. Because for us, we are grown up. So we have to see the children, the upcoming children. So before we will be at the age of 30 or 20, this type of corruption will be eliminated from society. But I think government have to fund the institution. If that is done, we can find corruption.
Thank you so much, John. And you raised a very good point about if you are in a state institution, then the work is not yours. You have to put it at a shoulder level instead of carrying it and all of that. But one thing that comes clear is that, look, when you destroy your corporate culture, then it will live with you forever. It is something that will be with you. You can't work anywhere. You have to you have to resolve that. Look, irrespective of the degenerating work attitude, I am not a part of that because I see myself as a goal-oriented person. I'm looking at something brighter than my present situation. So why should we continue? If we want to fight corruption, then we will not give up our best when it comes to corruption, the fight against corruption. But I have Peter on the line. Let me take the submission of Peter. Hello, Peter.
Hello, madam. Please, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. And you too, Peter?
I'm doing very well.
I'm good.
Okay, on the issue of corruption, my dear, I think that the adults and those who are above 50 are to be blamed. The reason why I'm saying this is because any corruption you see, even if it is done by a young man, there is an old person who is a director of a certain ministry who is backing it. Assuming a young man like me, I got a contract to come and to begin a government organization, and then they told me to double the amount before I can get the contract. So the people who we are supposed to respect as adults are not giving us, the little ones, good examples to follow. They are the same people who introduce us to the corrupt system. It has become a status quo in every government organization. I can tell you, 85% of every contract, whether it's petty cash or something, there is some amount of money you need to pay as a corruption charge added to the normal fee you are supposed to have charged under normal circumstances. So I would suggest that we should start from KG. So we will hope that by 40 years time, where those of us would have been wiped away, there will be a new crop, because those in the system now, madam, is too difficult and almost impossible.
Wow.
Thank you.
Peter.
Thank you.
That is a sad one. That is a sad one. But, you know, we have raised the issue. The first caller did make mention of it. The second caller has also reiterated about the role of the schools when it comes to the fight. But how about the role of parents? Because everything starts from the home. Because when I was growing up, I remember my mother would tell you, "Wait, so growing up, you know that this does not belong to me, so I wouldn't pick it, or I need not be selfish because somebody has another thing and I'm not getting it, so by hook or crook I should try and get it." There are certain things that are instilled in us. What should be the role of parents? Let me start with you, Mrs. Narteh.
I even talk about that. appeal to Peter is that he talked about the examples they see are not good enough, and he's asking that we focus on the children. But I want to urge him to also be an example to others. He can be a good example, because no matter how bleak the situation is, just being a good example and standing for the fight against corruption makes you like a candlelight in a darkened corner. So Peter should be an example, and once he becomes an example, it means that he's also imparting his children, he's also influencing his cousins and nephews and nieces as well by not joining that. Because as you said, children socialize or they mirror what adults do. So if in the house they see parents giving excuses for their inactions or things that they do that are not right, it means they learn from their their parents. So we all have to set good examples to our children, so that children, because sometimes when even you sit in a commercial car and somebody receives a phone call, and you could be in a car and the person will name a location that's, and then you sit there and then you wonder, what is, you know, it's like, what is happening? And people do it publicly because now we use cell phones, you know, our movements are not tracked and all that. So people do it, you hear it all the time. So these are the things that we do as parents, and our children will pick it, and then they also replay what we do. So it is important. I believe that parents would be the first role models for their children. And most of us had some values that we cling on because some parents instill those values in us, and teachers also added up to it. So a role that parents can play and teachers can reinforce those roles positively.
Right.
I think Beauty has said it all. You know, there's this story about a passenger in a vehicle. 3 people received different calls. One said, I'm on my way to Tamale. One said, I'm on my way to Sawam. One said, I'm on my way to Accra. So the passenger said, driver, stop the car. Where are we exactly going? Because this is not where we are going. So it's true, the telephone, especially the mobile phones, we tell lies, then our children will sit by us, we tell lies on phone. They are learning. So we should be examples to our children. We should lead exemplary lives for them. And then you correct them when they go wrong. And that is how you can instill that discipline into them. But there's this challenge where we talk about schools. But yesterday I was watching telly, and then we were doing a documentary for elections at the tertiary institutions. And then the narration that you get from it, it's very, very bad. People have to pay monies to stand for elections at the tertiary level, to the tune of about $60,000 to sponsor elections at the university level. So you realize that you can train them from the beginning, but when they get to another level, it can change. So it's not just at the lower level, but it has to cut across to the highest level. So that's how I see it.
Let me get your parting comments on the fight against corruption, and that will be the final one.
Okay, so with what we are doing now, you know that this year the African Union has declared this year as the year for corruption, anti-corruption. So they are fighting anti-corruption, and so it behoves on every citizen as an African Unionist to join that call. Everyone has to be on board. Join the call for education, awareness creation. Join the call for if you are in authority to prosecute, do it rightly. If you are in authority to investigate, you have to do it rightly. And then government is also pushing more funds to the fight against corruption. Civil society has to come together. It shouldn't be one person at one corner doing his or her own thing. We have to get everyone on board. Religious bodies also get on board, and then let us fight corruption.
Right. There's nothing.
Yeah, I would encourage everyone to adopt the principles of integrity in all that we do. Plainly, integrity means that doing the right thing even when no one is watching you. It is important. I think that is a very good principle. If we adopt, it's going to take Ghana far. And if we stop looking at us, but looking at the collective interest and looking at the cost of corruption, we'll become active participants in this discourse, and we'll not only see it as benefiting us as individuals, but we'll see that it is important to hold our duty bearers accountable to whatever we have committed to them. So let us all join the fight against corruption, and let us stop the fight against corruption anywhere we are, regardless of how small or big it is.
Finally for you.
I will also admonish the citizens of Ghana, everyone is a citizen of Ghana, of course, that they should actually see corruption, the fight against corruption, as an important thing, because the repercussions of corruption are very dire and can be very devastating to the socio-economic fortunes of a country. Also, my advice to the government is that one way they can also reduce corruption or fight against corruption is to pay civil servants or people in the government services. You should pay them well and also pay them ahead of time, because you find people occupying offices who have not actually been paid for a year. All these things will actually whet their appetite for corruption. So if these things are kept, at the end of the day, corruption, the fight will win the fight against corruption.
Thank you very much. Nana Kwame Fordjour is a communicator and a public relations practitioner, and he has been in here with us talking corruption. Thank you so much, Nana, for coming. With him is Beauty Emefa Narteh, the Executive Secretary of Ghana Anti-Corruption Coalition. Thank you so much, Madam, for also coming. I'm so grateful. And Mr. Michael Okai is the project coordinator for Ghana Integrity Initiative. I call them the local chapter of Transparency International, and that is it. I'm so grateful for your time, sir, for also passing through. This has been the Reporters Roundtable. We were looking at the United Against Corruption for Peace and Stability, and we asked the question, can the corrosive effects of corruption be countered with silence? And from our discussion thus far, it's a no-no. We have to speak about it, educate and inform, so that people will stop their corrupt practices.